In this video, I'm going to show you how to use an Azure function to send a message to Teams when a new resource is created in Azure. Hello, this is Saraltos and I'm Travis. In a previous video, I used Azure Automation to send an alert to Teams when a new resource group was created. I'll post the link above. Recently, Azure Functions announced preview support for PowerShell, and I've been looking for an automation example to give it a try. I thought this would be a great example to get started with Azure Functions. In this video, I use an Azure function to send an alert to Teams when a resource is added to an Azure subscription. I modified the code from the previous example to alert on multiple resource additions. Before we start, please take a second to subscribe and click the bell icon for notifications of new content. Thanks. Let's get started. I'm excited to start working with Azure Functions and PowerShell, but need to qualify this video and point out that I'm new to Azure Functions. I'll outline the steps I took to get a functioning example and include links to any documentation that helped along the way in the video description. With that said, however, I may not be doing this in the most efficient manner. Here's the flow. A resource is added to an Azure subscription and Event Grid triggers an Azure function. The function accepts the input data from Event Grid and then uses that to format the message to Teams. After that, the Azure function triggers another webhook and posts the message to Teams. The code is similar to what I did with Azure Automation, but I made some modifications to alert on multiple event types. Specifically, this code will alert on a resource group and server creation. It should be easy to add or modify the resource to what fits your environment best. Here's what I'm going to do in this video. I'm going to create a consumption-based PowerShell function app, create an Event Grid trigger function. Then I'm going to create an Event Grid subscription for that function. I'll create a filter on that Event Grid. I'll create a Teams webhook. Lastly, I'll configure the function to send a message to Teams, and then we'll test it. We'll go to Create Resource and Function App. Here it is. I'll select Function App and Create. The app name has to be globally unique, no caps or spaces. I'll just call it CIR Function App Demo. That's good. I'm going to create a new resource group. I'll leave that as CIR Function App Demo and I'll just add an RG at the end. I'm going to leave it on Windows for the OS. I'll leave the hosting plan to consumption-based. With consumption-based, you're only charged for what you use, and hosts are dynamically added as events increase. That's unlike the other option, which is App Service Plan, which is billed per a set amount of compute. I'll leave location to Central US, and the runtime stack is going to be PowerShell Core, and that is Preview. I'll leave the storage account as default, and click Create. And that will create my function app. Here I'm in Function Apps, and my CIR Function App Demo has been created. So I'm going to go into that. And here is the interface for Function Apps. The next thing I'm going to do is create a Function App. And I can do that right here with a plus next to Functions. And I'm going to modify this in Portal. So I'll select that and click Continue. And I want more templates. I'm not going to use webhook or timer on this. I'm going to finish in View Templates. And I want Event Grid. So there's one for Event Hubs and another one for Event Grid. I'm going to select Event Grid. It's going to ask to install an extension and I will click Install. All right, it's done. You only need to install that extension for the first Event Grid trigger that you install. Subsequent functions with Event Grid trigger won't require that. It'll already be there. So I'm going to click Continue. I'm just going to leave it Event Grid Trigger 1. That will be the name of the function. Now we're in Event Grid Trigger 1. A couple things I'll point out. Run.ps1 is the actual script or application that's running. And if I click over here, there's a couple files. There's also a function.json. This is control information for the function, but one thing I'll point out too is bindings. You can see the name is Event Grid Event. That's required for this input parameter of Event Grid Event. So for example, if I had code and I wanted to change that variable, I would need to set up a different binding. But I'm just going to leave that as it is because that works fine. Also, if you click down here, you can get the log and you can also get a console. So you can get terminal access to the Azure function. I'm going to leave it on. Actually, I'll just collapse that for now. The next thing I'm going to do is modify this file just slightly. Okay, I've added some code. This is some pretty simple write output statements that I have. We'll take a deeper look at what I'm doing with this in a little bit, but just all I'm doing is taking some information that's getting passed into this function, and I'm doing a write output so I can see what kind of data is getting passed in. But before I do that, let's go over to Add Event Grid Subscription. This is creating a new Event Grid subscription. I'm going to name this function test sub 01. Under topic types, I'm switching it to Azure Subscription. I'll select my subscription, and all I want is write success. If you wanted to monitor for, like, if something gets deleted, you could change a resource delete success, but I'm just leaving that as write success for now. This will trigger anytime there's a new resource added to the subscription or an existing subscription has been written to, so like an update. For this demo though, I only want to know when a new resource group is created or when a new server is created. So I'm going to come over to filters. If you did watch my other video on doing the same with Azure Automation, this is going to look familiar. So under data authorization action, that's the key. The operator will be the string contains. Notice that there's several operators in here that I could select. And the first thing I'm going to add is Microsoft Resource Subscription Resource Group Write. So that is going to be the action of a resource group being created or updated. Now the next thing I'm going to do, because I want to know when virtual machines are added, I'm going to add Microsoft Compute Virtual Machines Write. Now you may be wondering where I got that. Let me show you a document from Microsoft that is the resource provider operations. So under compute, Microsoft.compute, if we scroll down to virtual machines, here it is. That took me a while to find. Microsoft.compute/virtual machine/write. Create a new virtual machine or update an existing virtual machine. So this document has tons of different resource provider operations for pretty much any resource that Azure has. You can go through and you can find whatever you want to filter on and just pull that in. Again, I'll leave that link in the description so you don't have to try to follow along with me scrolling. Okay, let's get back. So those are the two values from that key that we're going to filter on. Now I'll click Create. And notice I didn't have to manually add a webhook. That's created automatically. Okay, I'm going to save this. I can't remember if I did that before. You do have to save it if you make changes. And then I'm going to add a resource group. By adding a resource group, I'll trigger this function, and then we're going to see what kind of information is getting output. I'll just call it function demo test, and I'll create. Okay, here I am back at the Azure function, and I'll be honest with you, there's been a few minutes between when I created that resource until now. If I go to monitor, here we can see the output. Here are the logs for the last time, and first time for that matter, that this function ran. And it does take up to 5 minutes between when that function ran and when you can actually see this data. Yeah, let's just go back here for a second. So I've got 3 pieces of information that I'm outputting here. One is event grid event. So here I'm getting the data that was passed in, and I'm just doing an out string and writing output. So with that, I'm going to be able to see what is getting passed into this function. The next one, I'm doing a get member on that data, and that's just going to tell me what data type is getting passed in. And I do this because with Azure Automation, the data coming in is JSON. We're going to look at how Azure Functions are treating data as it comes in. And then the last is we're going to convert it to JSON and write the output. So let's go down and look at what's happening. Here's the output data. This is the data that was passed into the function. I'm just doing a straight write output on that. Here is the information from get member. And the interesting thing about that is it is a hash table. So now I know that the data coming into the function is handled as a hash table, and I can use all the tools available for a hash table to work with my code in the function. The very last thing I did, convert to JSON and then a write output. So this is all the JSON data. If I copy that data from curly bracket to curly bracket, I can paste that into a JSON document and examine some of the data. At this point, I pasted the JSON data into a file in Teams called event.grid.event.json. And this is purely just so I can see that data and try to get a feel for what's getting passed in and identify certain values that I'll need for my function app. So if I go back to function apps, the first thing I'm going to need is the subscription ID. So let's see if we can find subscription ID. If I go back to event grid event, we can go under data and someplace down here. Here it is, the subscription ID. So all I need to do is identify the value of event grid event.data.subscription ID. I'll go back here. Next is the type name. Type name is the name of whatever was created. So if it's a server, it's going to be the name of the server that was created. If it's a resource group, the name of the resource group. That value can be different depending on what type of resource it is. That's the reason why I like to copy and paste this information into a JSON document, is it helps me just visualize and find it. If I want to find the name, if I go down to the subject, there it is. And here's the values are subscription, subscription ID, resource group, and function demo test. That's the name of the function. So the value of event grid event.subject and the fourth value in that is the name of my resource group. Okay, here's the code that I'm using. And as the Azure automation runbook that I did before, I'm just taking the value of eventgrid.subject and I'm doing a split on the /, and the fourth value is the name. That location may be different depending on the resource that's created. For example, servers, it's actually the 8th item. And that's where having the JSON version of that event grid information is helpful. You can run it once, visualize it, find that value, and then put it in the code. The next thing I need is the username. Let's see if we can find the username. Let's go up to event grid events and then data claims. So data and claims. There should be an option in here called name. There it is. So that's the name of the person who created the resource. So all I need to do is come over, and that value, I don't even have to assign it to a variable. I can just call it out during runtime. Last item is channel URL. Let's go into Teams and create one. Okay, here I am in Teams. I'm going to go down and go into apps and search for webhook. Incoming webhooks. I'm going to add it to Teams. I'll leave it at the general channel and set up the connector. I'll configure it. I'll call it function demo. I'll leave the image as it is and create. Once it's created, there'll be a webhook URL that I could copy. I'm just going to paste it in here. Great, now I have all the information I need to finish the Azure function. Here we are at the finish runbook. So I took care of this offline, but I'll go through, this will be available on my GitHub page. I'll include the link in the description as normal. I still have the code in here that we looked at before that was just doing output. You can comment that out if you want to. It's really not needed, but it doesn't hurt. I have some error control in. I've got my channel URL. That's a channel we got from Teams. I've got some error correction in here, but basically I'm getting the subscription ID. I already talked about that one. And let's see here. I've got an if statement. This is different from my Azure automation code. So I've got an if statement. This one looks for Microsoft.compute/virtual machines/write. So this is an event if a virtual machine is created. I set an activity type to server. We'll see where that comes into play here shortly. An image URL, you can update that as you need to. Next, I have the type name. So in this case, I'm pulling the data and it's going to be the 8th item in the array is the name of the server that's created. I put this in an if statement. So if it's not virtual machine/write, the next option is subscription/resource group/write. This is an else if statement that identifies if a resource group was created. And again, I set the activity type to resource group. And then another image. So it's all pretty much the same. If you wanted to alert on more than 2 items, you could copy this code, do some minor modifications, and get alerts on other events as well. Here's some more information I have for testing. I'm pretty sure I commented that out on the version I'm making public. And then the body. And here the body, I rewrote it a little bit so we can pull in some of that data. It's a little bit more flexible in what is pushed over to Teams as far as the wording. And then at the very end is the invoke REST method where it sends the message to Teams. So I'm going to save that. The first thing I'm going to do is create another resource group. I'll just call this test 1. And create. I've opened up logs in the Azure function. We should be able to see when Event Grid fires off the trigger that runs this function. Okay, there we go. We can see some of the informational outputs happening. So that trigger was fired. Let's pull open Teams and see what it looks like. So there it is. You can see the Azure resource creation notification happened. It's telling me that a new resource group is created. It's giving the name of the resource group as well as the subscription and who created it. Let's see what happens when we create a server. Here we are. You can see I have a second notification. This time it's indicating that a new Azure server was created. It gives the server name, the subscription ID, and who created it. So that's exactly what I was looking for. That's it for the demo. In this demo, we created a consumption-based app function. I showed you how to view the data coming into that function and even export it as JSON so you can review the data passed in even further. We set up an event grid and we set up filters. I also shared the link for the resource provider operations page so you can create filters based on other Azure Resource Manager operations. We created a Teams inbound webhook and we finished it off with the full code for the function that sent an alert to Teams when a new resource group or server is created. That's it for the demo. That's it for the demo. I hope you found this helpful. I have more to come on Azure Functions, so please subscribe and click the bell icon for notifications of new content. Thanks for watching.